Everyone, it's Professor Hall. So last time we looked at Tom Sawyer, we talked about the literary traditions that it fits into. We also looked at the author, his personal life, his writing style, his enduring legacy, all of that. And today we're going to look at the structure of the book, some of the historical and cultural context, and some of the literary elements and devices. I love this depiction of the whitewashing fence incident where Tom gets other people to do his work for him and then enjoys an apple while he watches. So, part one is nostalgia and humor. Now, basically, I think of this book as being two different books in a way. That the first part is really just based in nostalgia. Again, not sentimentality, but a little bit of longing for the past, not, strong emotions. And weeping and gnashing of teeth and any of that. But a look back at the past that is quite similar to the author's childhood. I think in particular, Twain might have been nostalgic for this time because, as we learned last time, his father passed away when Mark Twain was 11. And then he had to leave school, and then he began to find various types of employment. So that's sort of the first part of this book. We don't have big adventures. We have smaller stories that fit into that realism, that local color, writing movement, literary movement. And essentially, unlike Huck Finn, the book is not told by a child in first person, but it's narrated by an adult who looks or has special insight into the working of a young boy's heart. Tom is characterized as a mischievous boy with an active imagination. He's a little bit of a bad boy hero, which really would have been sort of revolutionary at the time. He doesn't have a comeuppance. He doesn't really have any kind of lasting punishment for any of the lies that he tells or any of the little scrapes he gets into, and in fact many times is rewarded for them, which is, again, we don't think of things as being moral or didactic in this type of a story, but I do want you to think of it as being a moral. What is the author trying to teach you in a different way than what the moral of books would have been in the past? His Aunt Polly is really a simple, kind-hearted woman, and I love that she is so intricately drawn as a character. She is, to me, very complex. She loves him. She even likes the fact, I think, in some ways that he's mischievous, but she does worry about him, and she tries to discipline him from a place of love. So she's kind of like a symbol of this haven of family, and then we have Huck Finn's father, who is the town drunk that is sort of the foil to her character. So all of that's happening in the first part. In terms of plot, we have these episodic tales. And we have a longer narrative structure in the second half, which is interesting to me because usually you get one or the other. But the beginning of the book has these very realistic stories where you feel like it's plausible that somebody could get into some of these scrapes. Giving painkiller to a cat and having it go medicine essentially to the cat that he's pretending to take. The incident with painting a fence. I do know a boy who did something similar, learning from this book when his friends had not read it. Going fishing, getting into a fight with one of the model boys who he thinks is, they both pretend that each has an older brother. Finding a first love and then ditching that girl the moment another girl comes into town. All of those are things that you feel like realistically could possibly happen. Twain based his hometown on Tom's home, rather, on his own hometown of Hannibal, Missouri, but he sanitizes it a little bit, for as gritty and dark as the second half can get. this is really a perfect setting for a boy to grow up kind of innocently while making fun of the customs and rules of adults. A really good example of this is Jim. Jim is a boy who is African American. It is never said whether Jim is a slave or a servant who is paid. We don't know, because Twain is sort of still trying to paint the picture of what town life would be like with this young boy going to get water from the town well, and yet not giving all the details, because again, this is a children's book. Twain himself, as I mentioned in the last video, he's sarcastic, he's bitter, he's very unsentimental, but this is one of his earlier works, so I think it might be poking fun a little bit at those who love sentimentality, to say, like, look, this is how boys actually are, but it's also, I do think, quite nostalgic and looking at the past with fondness and a little bit of yearning. This is a picture a little bit later because of, when photography exploded, but of people at a gas station in Missouri. And this is Tom Sawyer's fence. Here stood the board fence with Tom Sawyer persuaded his gang to pay him for the privilege of whitewashing. Tom sat by and saw that it was well done. Back in Hannibal, recreating the fence there. And the real plaque is over here, talking about how this was his childhood home. But I love that Tom Sawyer's fence gets more prominence. So, part 2 of the book, in my opinion, we take a little bit of a wild turn here. And you have to know some traditions. We talked about realism, which I think the first part of the book is really steeped in that. The second part of the book is shaped a lot by publications like Robinson Crusoe, which was published over 100 years before this. But this sets off this idea of the adventure novel for boys especially. So Peter Pan and Wendy is the book version of Peter Pan the play. Treasure Island, books like that where boys are going on these wild adventures, and these were really a staple during the golden age of children's literature. They focus on middle-class boys, for the most part, who are kind of allowed to be their own heroes. They dominate situations, they forge their own paths, they tell stories. Here's Tom and his friend on the island, playing at being pirates and things like that, right? And they're having a little bit of improbable, more outlandish adventures. So with Treasure Island, we have a boy who goes on a ship. The ship captain, there's a mutiny, and then we're hunting for treasure, right? All of that. It's much more romantic in terms of the literary traditions, much less realistic. So the first half of Tom Sawyer really features boys pretending and imagining grand adventures and kind of dipping into them here and there. But the second half has these boys really actually in the middle of a true adventure. So Tom and his, for all intents and purposes, I guess, girlfriend, or special friend, I guess as my mom would say, Becky, they are actually being chased. They are actually being put into the middle of the dangerous situation that he would have read about and played at in the first half of the novel. So I think it's a really interesting shift, and one that I want you to pay attention to. Injun Joe, I hate that, but that is the name of the character. We will just from here call him Joe. We have here a gravesite of the man that was thought to be this inspiration for this character. He lived to be 102. He was found as an infant in an abandoned Indian camp by a man named Douglas, who raised him. He denied he was the Injun Joe in Mark Twain's writings, and he always lived an honorable life. I think that is really important to note. But he was known as Indian Joe in Hannibal, and I think probably, unfortunately for him, was at least the name inspired the character. I hate that he denies it, and yet what is the first thing on the headstone? Not his actual name, Joe Douglas. I feel really bad for him, actually. This is a depiction of Tom and Joe. So in the book, he is half Native American and half Caucasian, and because of that, he's really an outcast. This would have been incredibly difficult at the time to be of mixed race, because you don't therefore fit into either the Native American settlements or the more predominantly white town, right? An emphasis is placed on a little bit with the name of his race, but there's more emphasis placed on his nature. He is spiteful, he is violent, and he is murderous. So at the point in which he's introduced, Tom's adventures do become more dangerous, and the adventures move from imaginary to real and much more improbable. So in the sequels, which have fun trying to read those, they're not as good, and really just cash grabs because he was struggling financially. But the realism and nostalgia are almost completely gone. Tom and Huck and Jim get into like futuristic air balloon sort of and travel to Africa. They survive lions and robbers, and at that point much more just a straight up adventure novel. Which is interesting because it's really far away from the book he was originally known for, which is Innocents Abroad. So historically, antebellum, before the war, Missouri in the 1840s, and it really reflects life in this border state. Slavery was legal, yes, but as I said, being on the border, it's kind of like a swing state. The attitudes are really mixed. He is depicting childhood in rural America. So schooling, family roles, social expectations of the time. These are things I'd like you to look for while you read. There is heavy religious influence. So church attendance, Sunday school, the Sunday school picnic, the church social, all of these are really influencing community life. There's a long passage about Bible verses that are memorized, and then you get tickets. As I say here, it's kind of a big deal. And it turns into, obviously, another humorous incident in Tom's life. And then we have the idea of frontier versus society. So yeah, it's this small town life, but specifically in this town, we have people who were basically like pioneers coming to live in the West. And we have this idea of like the Wild West, and then the Wild West is tamed. So we have this transition from frontier ruggedness to a more settled, structured community. And in particular, church, yes, school, yes, but also women, and particularly moms, are the civilizers of rugged men. So we have these men who are very rough and tough and rumbly, and then we have these women who want to make them wear shoes. Long and ties, and make them comb their hair and take baths and things like that. And the boys really wrestle with these changes, and the uncivilized life is what they're longing for. So to keep pushing the boundaries of the frontier, to have more freedom and autonomy away from these meddlesome women, and away from school, and away from church, just out in the wilderness, so to speak. So this is also leading us into this idea of life on the river. We are in Missouri on the Mississippi, and this is a picture of Robert Fulton's Clermont. This was the first vessel propelled by steam in 1807. A lot of early things trying to sort of propel things by steam, but this steamship, invented in 1807, revolutionary to the time. It really completely changed life. The riverboats and the steamboats, we see a lot of paddle boats being talked about and being depicted in the artwork for this book. They in the following decades after Fulton, they really changed transportation and commerce. So river travel was really slow and dangerous, dependent on the direction of the current. You'd have to get in the boat, be moved by the current, try to fight against it when stopping at port, all of that, right? With flatboats and keelboats, you could carry goods downstream, but then you had to have them manually pulled or dragged upstream. In New York State, you have the Erie Canal, where you have these boats that were being pulled because there is not really a current on the Erie Canal. So you have boats being pulled by mules for the most part, at least for a long period of time. So I've got a mule, her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. That's about as far as you can get before that mule's going to get too tired out, right? So that is sort of what things looked like. They would be dismantled after one trip, or they'd be dragged or pulled upstream, and it took a lot of work. So the invention of and spreading of these steam-powered boats really did change everything. They become central to the economy and culture, especially of the South and Midwest as we travel down the Mississippi. Steamboats can move upstream and downstream efficiently, which shrunk travel time. There were less transportation costs. It opened up a lot of commercial possibilities, and towns like Hannibal were river ports. So then that brought a lot of income into those towns. We have products from cotton to tobacco, iron, timber, all of that. And this is another reason why the town was being civilized, because money means industry, and we have people, coming in who have a little bit of money and aren't just, wanting the wilderness. The steamboat also brought news, mail, luxuries from the east, new people, as I said, and rapid expansion of settlement and commerce. But the steamboats were also embedded into the economy of slavery. So they're used to transport enslaved people. By this point, there was no transatlantic slavery allowed, but a lot of slaves and plantation owners would encourage their slaves to have large numbers of children. And so we do have the transportation of those individuals, which reinforced the plantation system in the Deep South. So the book Tom Sawyer doesn't really engage with this directly. It is in the background, and it's much more prominent, obviously, in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. But when they are excited to see a ship, yes, sometimes it's bringing things like cotton and tobacco or timber, news and mail and things like that. And other times, and possibly in addition, it is also transporting people. So that is something to kind of keep in mind. However, we also have, for young boys like Tom, they are mechanical marvels, but they're also symbols of adventure, mystery, and opportunity. And Twain talked about his own experiences often. Looking at the paddle wheeler, pulling up into port, stirring the imagination, and thinking about exotic places that you could travel to on this boat, and grown-up freedoms. He became a riverboat pilot and achieved that dream before the Civil War. So there's a deep personal connection to this for the author. And again, I think that it is quite nostalgic to look at a piece of machinery that is fairly new, and they're getting bigger all the time, and now it's coming up into port, and you want to sort of have that experience, right? And you're entranced by it. And this is definitely seen in our book. So other cultural contexts, the social hierarchy and class distinctions. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Respectability, as I said, how is that shaping the characters' interactions? Family reputation, especially in a small town. So some people are, we have Judge Thatcher. We have the Sunday school master. We have people like Huck Finn's father. And he is, kind of a pariah because of his father, and he doesn't go to school and things like that. We also have issues with gender roles. There are different expectations for boys than girls. Tom sort of embodies adventurous masculinity, and Becky Thatcher represents a much more traditional femininity. Although I think less than less than Amy Lawrence does, who's Tom's first love, who was engaged to him at the beginning of the book, so to speak, as much as you can be when you're like 10. Childhood innocence and imagination, the celebration of play, mischief, freedom, and having that be a real counterpoint to adult society, where there is, as I have down here, moral education, punishment, repentance, virtue. All of these things are sort of showing the contemporary values, many of which Twain is mocking. We also have this really interesting thing with superstition and folklore that the boys are participating in as kind of this part of boyhood. Yes, local myths and things like that reflect rural culture, as I have here, but also like I know how you get rid of warts. You go out in the moonlight in front of a grave and you spit 3 times, and then you find a toad and you rub that toad on your wart, and then if you kiss the toad and let him go, then you won't have warts anymore. Well, I heard that you have to put a poultice on. Like, all of these like very strange things. And also as a part of boyhood, also, which didn't have in here, I wish I did, is the exchanging of goods through bartering. So if you do my work for me, I'll let you see my sore toe. Well, I don't like that. Well, what if I give you my Aggie marble? She's a real beaut. Well, okay, then you gotta do my chores for me twice. That okay, well, all right. Like we exchange like a bit of string, half an apple with a bite taken out of it. You know, these are things that are treasures to these little boys. We have a lot of social criticism in this novel. This is the version where Jodie Foster is Becky Thatcher here. A little bit more mischievous than the Becky of our book. But childhood and society, contrasting the imaginative spirit that a lot of other writers of the Golden Age are encouraging, but also showing how that contrasts strict rules of school and church, and highlighting this tension between individuality and how we're encouraging it in children, and then also this idea of social conformity. The education system in particular, with its rote learning, you know, memorizing things and spitting them out, repeating them, that we've really gotten away from in American culture, in part because of people like Twain, who think that we should be encouraging imagination and creativity and, you know, things of that nature. He would be in favor of project-based learning, maybe. So school is kind of stifling children's natural curiosity. It's also stifling their desire to just go in the swimming hole and not have to do any work. And Tom's quite a bit lazy in this book. Social class and hypocrisy. So we do have Aunt Polly and the townspeople who are emphasizing appearances and respectability. But again, she's not just a character, really caricature. She's really like a single parent doing her best with her own children, plus the children of her deceased sister, and really does try to love Tom despite his faults. So those are kind of things to look for. When are people being hypocrites? When are we seeing that connect to their ideas of social class, who's in and who's out in this society? How are children trying to buck against the adult traditions, especially in places like school? We also have again, this idea of religion and morality that I think I've already talked about a little bit. What is the sincerity of these people? What is the effectiveness of moral education and of church, especially when it's hypocritical? And it's just for things like we see how many Bible verses we can memorize to get a free Bible. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, why would anyone want to do that? Does that have anything to do with how they treat others? Does it have anything to do with their connection to God, which is something that Twain really didn't believe in either, but I think he is at least here not pushing it that far, but at least asking the question of like, you know, what are we actually putting importance on? Race and slavery is kind of in the background. As I said, it's much more on display with the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And we have some difficult things. You know, there's racial attitudes of the time and stereotypical portrayals, especially of Jim and of Joe, who is of mixed race, and it's sort of implied that that's one of the reasons that he's a criminal. He's also a criminal because of how society has treated him, and I think for Twain that would be more important. So something to kind of keep in mind as you're reading. Some other, and to kind of recap, I love that picture. Nostalgia and sentiment, morality, especially between boys and adults, adventure, both pretend and the real dangers the boys find themselves in, heroism between the boys, and also as boys sort of become men, what does it mean to be a hero? The ridiculousness of this adult life and rules, issues of class and race, gender roles, in particular, I think we see with Mary, Aunt Polly, and Becky Thatcher, to a certain extent Amy Lawrence, and the process of kind of maturing while still in boyhood. And the last thing I will say is that we don't have time in the class that I'm teaching to also read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but if you do, I think of them almost like a set that really does go together. At the end of Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn kind of takes over the story in a lot of ways. And I kind of like you to kind of look for that. And then at the end of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer comes back into the picture in more prominence and kind of reclaims his place so that they're now on equal footing. So that's something to look for as well. So that is it. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I hope it gives you a lot more insight into the book and helps you to kind of look for some of these things as you're reading. I can't wait to see your thoughts. Thanks, everyone.